The member for Mackellar.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Mr Deputy Speaker, in the short time that I have been here in this parliament, I have to say that this inquiry by the Parliamentary Joint Committee on Corporations and Financial Services was definitely the most willing that I have been involved in. It is fair to say that it gave new meaning to the term full and frank advice being given by many witnesses. I have to say that the answers were both, in most cases, direct, and I particularly want to single out Omni Bridgeway, that is an Australian litigation funder who throughout this process gave the committee both what it needed to and understood to make its deliberations possible. In a desert of integrity, frankly, it is simply a single oasis. And for that, I thank its CEO and its organisation. But the one thing that this did show is that the adversarial nature of our justice system, and indeed this inquiry, did provide some very good information for this parliament to consider. The first is that our justice system is not meant to be about profit. Our justice system is meant to be about justice. Years ago, many years ago, and for many centuries, the concept of championing and maintenance was maintained in the legal system, that people were not allowed to be part of an action that they were not part of, and that they were not meant to profit from legal action. But many reports by the same people that the Deputy Chair spoke of made this point over and over again, that we need access to justice. The Australian Law Reform Commission, ASIC, the Australian Law Council, all of them talk about the prohibitions and the barriers to access to justice. But always in the fine print, Mr Deputy Speaker, is the fact that the greatest barrier to entry is the cost of the lawyers themselves. And not a single one of them, not the Productivity Commission, not the ALRC, not the Law Council, ever speaks to the fact that maybe lawyers should consider reducing their fees. It's a bit hard for this parliament to cop to the fact to have millionaire partners of class action law firms coming before the Parliamentary Joint Committee inquiry into this, claiming that they represent impoverished individuals and impoverished Australians just seeking access, when they themselves will not consider reducing their fees to do so. No one ever talks about lawyers reducing their fees. And so what we know is that some of these boutique investment products, otherwise known as litigation funders, are making returns of over 500%. When the committee asked one of the litigation funders, could we invest in one of these funds, given that its returns are over 500%, they informed us that we would need a minimum investment of $1 million. When a committee member said that they thought that at 500% they could rustle up $1 million, the reply came back, oh no, that's in US dollars. So then the reply came, well, I'm sure I can get, or this person could get to $1 million US. All our funds are oversubscribed. Most of them are in places like Gibraltar, places like Malta, and of course the Bahamas. Those opposite are constantly lecturing this parliament about overseas tax evading corporations. But when it comes to litigation funders, the only thing they did when they were in government was they gave them a free pass and absolved them from the corporations law. The idea that litigation funders should be regulated as a managed investment scheme came from the federal court itself. And when they were in government, they moved heaven and earth to make sure that that would never apply to them. Is a litigation fund managed? Yes. Is it an investment at returns of over 500%? Clearly. And is it a scheme? Absolutely. Should it be managed? Yes, it should be. And what we found is, in all of this, is the hopelessly conflicted nature of the regulators around this. We found consumers and class members being ripped off, being given misleading and deceptive information. When reported to the ACCC, who will prosecute a toy store if they don't have the right warning labels on a toy, the ACCC, after 9 months, actually decided it was an investment product and it should be the job of ASIC. So ASIC, who will pursue real estate agents because it thought that they might have been giving people false information or incorrect information, or in fact information about withdrawing early from their super funds, even though they had no evidence other than an internal email from a subordinate to a manager. but they'll pursue a real estate agent, but they wouldn't take up this cause, where the very same people who apparently are only seeking access to justice are seeing themselves being ripped off through misleading and deceptive information. The ACCC and ASIC had no interest whatsoever in pursuing this in the interests of ordinary Australians and consumers. That's why we are determined that Australian consumers are given the protections that people have when they're opening a savings account. But apparently these tax haven dwelling, litigation funding, investment vehicles that are bespoke, they should be absolved from the laws of this parliament. It is absurd. It undermines, as we heard evidence, it undermines the very pillars of our justice system, where lawyers' responsibility and obligations to their clients are subverted by their obligations to the people funding the action. There have been court cases in London that have made it very clear that lawyers now have no obligations to clients but rather to their funders. And this has all been reflected in the explosion in class actions, an explosion in insurance premiums, in international investors saying that they are not seeking to make investments in Australia because of the nature of class actions in this country and the funding vehicle in litigation funding. And that's before we get to shareholder class actions, where we have the absurd idea that suing yourself as an owner of the firm is somehow going to punish people who didn't disclose information. That became well and truly clear. We had Hester come to us and say, oh no, we think that's a good idea, that we should be allowed to sue ourselves, and then halfway through their evidence to the committee admit that they're an investor in Omni Bridgeway, but it's okay, they're only a passive investor. We had the situation where the Victorian government announced that they would introduce contingency fees against the advice of the Australian Law Council. On the very same day they made that announcement, the Attorney-General in Victoria, Jill Hennessy, had a meeting with the directors of Morris Blackburn, who later that afternoon made a $100,000 donation to the Federal Labor Party. This whole system, unregulated, unseen, operating in the darkness, with people refusing to come before a committee and give us straight answers to straight questions, is undermining the very pillars of our justice system and is perverting so much of the policy making in this place and in other places. I highly recommend the recommendations in the report.